With over 2 decades of upper management experience in the hospitality industry, Malia Sanders serves as the Executive Director of Native Hawaiian Hospitality Association. Additionally, Malia is Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Hawaiian Civic Club of Honolulu and Chair of the annual Holoku Ball. She has been recently recognized as Social Impact Entrepreneur of the Year and being featured as a Native American leader in culture heritage tourism. Welcome, Malia Sanders.
Mahalo for having me.
I'd like to start by asking a little bit more about your background and experience in the hospitality industry. How did you end up working in this industry?
It was sort of by accident, I guess. I was just recently graduated college and I was working for a bank, and I would get customers all the time that were from the visitor industry, people that worked in a hotel or had somehow some tie to the visitor industry in Hawaii. And they would always compliment me on how easy I was to talk to and how much they enjoyed, having conversation with me and that I really should consider applying. So at the time, I was fairly young. I walked into the human resources office at the Hilton Waikoloa Village and filled out an application, and I got hired right on the spot. And that became the first day of, I guess, the recognition that this was kind of my calling, not really knowing it at first. I was one of those college kids that I wasn't really quite sure what I really wanted to focus on. So having just a really welcoming and warm personality, I kind of fit right in with the visitor industry here in Hawaii, and really enjoyed my time at the Hilton Waikoloa Village, really honing that craft. I was there for about 10 years before I moved into, another visitor industry facing type of opportunity. But I've always been a conversationalist. I love meeting people from all over the world and finding connection with them, finding myself in them, finding themselves in me. And so I think some people are just natural at that, and I feel like it's my calling.
How do you say the hospitality industry in Hawaii has changed in your time since you started?
I would say that when I was young and during my first introduction years of being in the hospitality industry, it was really about mass tourism, getting as many visitors to Hawaii as possible, and really not knowing what they're doing once they've landed. That was really what it was like back then. It was every visitor had their own itinerary. Some of them did book, tours, but for the most part, a lot of the visitors that I would see, especially from Europe and especially from America, they were free independent travelers just looking for an experience, trying to experience Hawaii in their own way and kind of not really having a map to do that or a roadmap to do that. And so many of them, the hospitality hotel that I worked at, Hilton Waikoloa, was the largest at the time in the state of Hawaii, largest number of rooms. So we were seeing anywhere from, 1,000 people on an average day to over 3,000-4,000 guests a day.
Wow.
So it was a lot of people. And I think that's really the major shift was that, but also Hawaiian culture was always present, I would say, in small ways, but not as prevalent as we want it to be today. Our industry is striving for a more respectful and responsible visitor these days. And we're trying to achieve that not in our numbers of people per se, but in the quality of the guest experience and in the quality of the experience that our community has as a result of having tourism as our economy.
What kind of experiences were the tourists looking for back then compared to what are they looking for now?
I think the same still applies. I think we're always going to have visitors that want to, of course, see the whales and the dolphins and our sea creatures and sea life. And of course, sit on the beach and enjoy cocktails on the beach and watch the sunset. But I think what's happening these days is our visitors come with better education. They have access now because of the internet to any bit of information that they can find. Sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it isn't. So our guests are really seeking the most authentic experience as possible, I think. And a lot of our return guests for sure want that experience. And I think for the ones that are first timers to Hawaii, kind of don't really know what to expect. You know, of course, they're going to see the sunset. They know that. They know that they're going to be on the beach. And they know that. But beyond that, I think it's really an awakening for a lot of people, you know, first timers, that they didn't realize how deep the culture is here and how life changing it would be for them when they leave. And I think that's what sets any cultural place apart, is when you're going to a destination that has a rich history, a rich culture, a rich indigenous culture, you get all these layers upon layers of learning that a visitor can experience, which is very different than visiting, you know, a place that, like Las Vegas, you know, for example, that is constantly changing and evolving. And you never know if the next time you come back, if that building's going to be there or not. Whereas with a place like Hawaii, those mountains are going to stand the test of time. The sunset is going to look that way for millennia, you know. And these timeless things are all tied to the indigenous people of the place and the values that we hold dear. And I think that's what sets our destination apart from many other places around the world, is that we really want to ensure that the culture is a part of the experience in the most authentic way possible.
Would you say the opportunities to get to know indigenous culture in Hawaii are more or less than before?
Oh, certainly more. I think, you know, we've always had this long-standing struggle between the balance of tourism, like what is too many visitors, what is not enough visitors, and how does the community play a part in that economy, in that model of tourism. And really what tourism is meant to do at the end of the day is to provide economic opportunity for the community members that live in that destination. And I think what happened for a really long time was that we as community members didn't really see a benefit to tourism. And so there were many Native Hawaiian groups and Native Hawaiian practitioners that stayed out of that equation for a while. And it isn't until rather recently, I think, that we're really driving home the idea that community needs to be a part, community needs to be present, Native Hawaiians need to be present in the model. Otherwise, it's just not going to work for us, and it's continue to, you know, extract what it does out of our community and not provide us any real benefit.
Now, I'd like to ask, how was the Native Hawaiian Hospitality Association founded, and why? What are the goals and initiatives of this organization?
Our organization has an interesting history. We were founded 25 years ago by two co-founders, Dr. George Kanahele, who was an educator and just a brilliant visionary, and Senator Kenneth Brown, who was a state elected, you know, senator in our legislative government. But he was also an advocate for many businesses and organizations and nonprofits. He was a business leader. And the two of them would have really interesting conversations about tourism and the role of the Native Hawaiian in tourism. And they each approached the problem from a different perspective. But they were great friends and they enjoyed conversation with one another. So after many years of kind of talking it out, they invited other Native Hawaiian leaders in the visitor industry to come sit at the table with them and talk tourism. And that's how the Native Hawaiian Hospitality Association started. We were founded in 1997 with a two-part mission. One is to provide consultation and education and training based in the values of the Hawaiian culture to the visitor industry. And then the second part of our mission is really about creating Native Hawaiian leadership and growing the number of Native Hawaiians who are benefiting from tourism and actively engaged in tourism as leaders.
Why do you think it's important to educate the visitor industry about Native Hawaiian culture?
Well, we're not educating in the beginning, we weren't educating visitors per se. We were focused on training and education for the people that were working in the visitor industry. Like many other indigenous populations in our place, we are the minority. And so we need our community members and other residents to really be on board with understanding the authentic values of our place so that they can better express them to our visitors, because they're the ones helping us to host them. And so we're really, in the beginning, focused a lot on education for the visitor industry workforce, because there really wasn't anybody at that time, 25 years ago, doing any type of cultural training for the workers in the industry. And so we were set up initially to help with that. And over the years, we've advocated greatly for organizations, corporations to hire their own cultural practitioners, their own cultural resources to provide their team members with education training from the very beginning at the point of hire. And then to have ongoing training with their team members so that as a visitor experiences someone that works in the industry for either help or conversation, they are completely set up to success so that they can share authentically the true meaning of aloha with our visitors and explain the different cultural values that are really important to the place that we all love. And I think when there's a danger in removing culture from this equation of tourism, that it just becomes any other place, right? If you were to take away the Hawaiian culture from the experience of Hawaii, then it's just another place with sand and surf and sun, right? And what really makes it special is us. It's Native Hawaiians. It's the values that we hold so dear to us and the place that we love so much because it's connected to us. We talked a little bit about accents, and that's something that you are tied forever to the place that you grew up, the place that inspired your growth as an individual. You're tied to that forever in the language. And so learning the words of the Hawaiian language and how to properly pronounce them offers respect back to the place. It offers the people that work in the industry an opportunity to honor the place and the people. And so I think that's probably the most important aspect of hosting with values, no matter what place you are in the world, wherever you work. If you're working in the visitor industry, you should get to know the values of the place that you're working. If they're not your values, then you should learn to embrace them and learn about them so that you can be a better advocate for the place that you live and the place that you love.
100%. I'd really like to ask you the true meaning of aloha, as well as what are these cultural values that you like to educate the industry?
I'll take the first one second and the second one last, if that's okay.
Sure.
We talk a lot about Hawaiian values in our training, and there are many, many Hawaiian values, as there are many Hawaiian proverbs. But values are really about the foundation of a culture. And when you think about the values of hosting, there are words in the English language that closely associate with words in the Hawaiian language that mean somewhat the same thing or as close as possible to. They're never going to be exact, right? Indigenous words often have multiple layers of meaning that are not as black and white as the English language. And so when you think about hospitality, we have a word in Hawaii called Ho'okipa, and that is the value, the reciprocal value of hosting and to be hosted. And with the value of hosting and being hosted, there's responsibility on each of those players in that equation. And the word that we tie to as closest to the English word for responsibility is the word kuleana, which actually is more of talking about the privilege of the responsibility to do whatever it is. And then with that, the word malama, which means to take care of or to care for something. And in order to execute malama, to take care of something, have responsibility for it, and to be able to host in that way, you have to have aloha. And aloha is this word that is so rich in meaning. There's many layers of meaning to the word aloha. And I think around the world, everyone thinks it's just a greeting. And it is. At the surface level, it certainly is. When we say aloha to one another, we are sharing the essence of our being with another person. It's not just a word. It carries with it a lot of responsibility and ownership. And so when we define aloha, it's this unconditional giving of oneself to a person without any expectation of getting anything in return. And so when you think about that definition versus, oh, it just means hi or hello or goodbye or I love you, it's so much more. Because with that word, you cannot execute the value of malama, to take care of something, without having aloha for it. And you cannot take on your responsibility to host someone without having aloha for that. And so these words are really tied to one another. They help us to understand the values both separately and together. And then our visitor gets to experience that. So first, in order for us to be able to execute aloha with other people, we have to learn the true meaning of aloha first, and we have to execute it with ourselves and then with the people that we love and support. And then you're able to express that to a visitor. And so it's that way, and it's so much more at the same time than just a hello, goodbye, or I love you. And I hope I did that justice.
Of course. What would be, if you would teach me 5 words that I could contemplate and ponder and get the essence of the philosophy or the culture? What would they be?
It would probably be those words, those exact words, because I feel like in order to be a contributing member of society, not just the society of Hawaii, but the society of the human race, we have to learn how to give aloha freely. And aloha is really something that is meant to be given without any expectation of anything back. And it's sort of like you put it out into the world, not knowing how it's going to come back to you. And sometimes it takes a long time to come back. And sometimes it's immediate, but you have to have a little bit of patience as well. Aloha teaches us about having patience with one another. It's also this extension of yourself. It is how you show your mercy. It's also how you show your vulnerability, but it can also be your greatest strength at the same time. So words like aloha, ho'okipa, kuleana, malama, they're very important to day-to-day life in Hawaii. And they're also super important to our visitor industry here in Hawaii. We're constantly trying to execute those values with our visitors and with each other and with ourselves all the time.
And probably have the visitors take them with them wherever they go and kind of share the culture further.
The goal is to find connection, really. I mean, if you think about each of us as human beings, we are all, if we trace our genealogy back far enough, we are all indigenous to some place. All of us are. And getting to know how you are connected to a person and sharing an experience with a person, it should change your heart and it should change your mind about things, because you're trying to find yourself in them when you meet someone, right? And the goal with our visitors is not only for them to learn these things while they're visiting here in Hawaii, but more importantly, to take these values home with them and apply them to their lives in ways that make sense for them and for their culture. I've talked to a lot of different people from around the world over the course of my career, and the Greeks, they have their own version of these values that I share, and the Japanese certainly have an extension of the values that we share, but different words for them. So I think when you're having conversations with people who might be from a totally different part of the world, they're connectors. They're ways that we see ourselves in other people. And it's a way to hopefully one day bring about world peace, through living the values that we all hold so dear to us as human beings. I always tell people, the things that I share about the values of the Hawaiian culture, they're not new to you. You learned all this in kindergarten. You learned all of this in grammar school and elementary school. It's all about being a good human being. So they should resonate with you because they should be very familiar to you. You just maybe forgot along the way how to execute those values and how to prioritize those values in your life. And maybe it's just a matter of reawakening it in your spirit. That might change your life, hopefully.
I truly agree. The language that we use changes our thinking, and how we think really shapes our life. And that's a very powerful tool, actually, when people take it in. In English, it's very limited to English thinking.
When you think about conflict, right? A lot of conflict is just because people misinterpret one another. And if we had taken the time maybe to ask more deep dive questions with the person, maybe we wouldn't be in conflict with them. It's all a matter of usually a misunderstanding, or sometimes it is that the values that the person has are different than yours and they're not aligning with what you value as a person. So that's also some advice I share as well.
I understand. I have to ask about the COVID since it's a hospitality industry that you work with, and how was Hawaii affected by it? Very blunt and broad question, but
it was a very.
Do you have some summary about?
Yeah, it was very odd to have no visitors. To go from having millions of visitors, we were at 10.4 million prior to the pandemic, with a 1 million, maybe 1.5 million population, to having no visitors at all. It was eerie for me as a community member, but at the same time, we all rejoiced a little bit. We had our beaches to ourselves and we could enjoy the outdoors alone without interference from our visitors. And, you know, parking was not an issue. Traffic was not an issue. But at the same time, the longer that goes on, you start to see the real impact socially and economically of what it does to people to be isolated for so long. You know, coming out of the pandemic, it was difficult for our community members trying to reset. And I think culturally too, Hawaiians are so used to being such loving people, to go through almost 2 years of not being able to see your family. Family is like one of the values, a big one for our people. So to not have the closeness of family was very difficult for our population. But also, I mean, just economically, the hardship of it, there were a lot of people that lost their jobs. The visitor industry supports over 200,000 jobs directly. And so to go from that to maybe 40,000 was a severe hit for Hawaii. But I think pivots are important. And I want to kind of speak to that. There were a lot of organizations, including ours, that made pivots during the pandemic and used really innovative techniques. I mean, of course, Zoom and Google and Teams and Microsoft and all of that helped us to get connected with one another. It was like going back to the Skype days, but with this new technology that was so much more robust than it had ever been before. And then just utilizing that innovation to your advantage to pivot your work and to try to do things, you know, remotely. You either did it or you did not. And those that did make the pivot fared fairly well during, you know, the pandemic and the months leading into our recovery period. But those that just chose not to had a harder time getting out of that. And I think the thing that we forget about Hawaii is that a lot of our activities are outdoors. A lot of our visitor experiences are with a lot of people. So taking something like a whale watching tour and just not having it, not only does that hurt that one company that they use that as their livelihood, but you can't remotely go on a whale watching tour. You know what I mean? Like, it's not possible to use Zoom in that way for some things. And so, you know, those kinds of companies really suffered during the pandemic and continue to struggle in the recovery, you know, dealing with inflation and all of the economic things that happen after a worldwide pandemic. Every country goes through it slightly differently, but we're all struggling the same, I think.
And how's the recovery been? So it's been a while since the pandemic, and has the industry recovered somewhat?
I think we had a very excellent year. I think personally, our comeback from the pandemic was phenomenal. We're certainly above our trends that we had forecasted for ourselves. I think last year we ended somewhere between 8 and 9 million visitors in 2022. So not exactly pre-pandemic levels, but still much more than we had anticipated. And like I said, not everything is about the numbers, but if it's the only thing that you have to measure, pre-pandemic, it's the main thing, right? Like people are looking at numbers of visitors, but it's not the only thing that we measure. We're looking at also the social economic impact of the pandemic. And there were a lot of really interesting organizations that had their start during the pandemic. A lot of women entrepreneur-owned businesses were created during the pandemic because you had all these working moms that stayed home with their kids and found innovative ways to create entrepreneurship. And I found that fascinating. A lot of them were women, which is just really exciting, I think, for entrepreneurship. We know that entrepreneurship and small business are key drivers to successful economy anywhere. And so we really want to do our best to support small business any way that we can.
Recently, you were recognized as a social impact entrepreneur of the year. Can you briefly tell me about that? That's a really nice title to have.
Honestly, it was so unexpected to receive that award. But I understand the attention that the program that we had brought in order to, get to that point of receiving the award. So I would love to share a little bit about our Kaiāulu Hoʻokipa program. And the word Kaiāulu in the Hawaiian language means, roughly translated, it means community. And Ho'okipa, as I explained before, is hospitality. And so our organization, along with a partner organization, which is called Travel to Change, we got together and we tried to solve some of the burdens that our community nonprofit groups have trying to enter the visitor industry. And I think what was so fascinating about it is that, our visitors desire to have a more authentic experience with Hawaii. And the best way to do that, honestly, is to bring them into our community. Bring them into volunteerism projects or community building projects that really have high impact and low footprint for a visitor. The takeaways from it are can be expounded upon as life-changing for them. They get to learn a little bit about the place a little bit more intimately. They get to learn about the community that lives there. They get to go on an activity or have an experience, a cultural experience right in the community. And the visitor dollar that is spent to go on that activity helps sustain that organization. And so we were trying to get creative about how we were going to do that. And so we created a cohort opportunity, an impact studio, where we helped nonprofit organizations and community groups build out their program for hosting visitors. So it was a 6-week program. We introduced them to topical experts in fields ranging from business insurance to marketing to social media to building your website, things like that, to help them build capacity to be able to host visitors. And then we shared with them, I think the most important part of it is we shared with them the definition of regenerative tourism and using that terminology more, because that's truly the model of tourism that our destination desires to operate in moving forward. And I'm happy to share that definition with everyone, because the definition varies from destination to destination slightly differently, depending on what the values of your culture are. So for us in Hawaii, we want to have a more respectful and responsible visitor, as I explained. We also want our community to be engaged in tourism. We want tourism to be sustainable, provide economic opportunity, and we want the values of our culture to be represented in that tourism model. And so for us, that is how we define regenerative tourism. It is a positive impact for our destination. Tourism that provides positive impact for our destination, whether it be circular economy, or growing Native Hawaiian nonprofit organizations, or growing community group organizations that engage in tourism, or growing small business or Native Hawaiian owned businesses that are trying to engage in the visitor industry. All of that together, along with the social responsibility of changing your buying habits as an individual of your community. For me, I do not shop from the big box stores unless I absolutely have to. I shop small business. I buy Native Hawaiian owned things. I wear Native Hawaiian clothing designers. I try as much as possible to make my daily decisions be about my culture and my values. And I try to shop local or Native Hawaiian owned with everything that I buy and consume. And so I think those things paired together, if everyone in the system is doing that, if every contributing member of society is doing that, we can make a positive change for tourism for the better, so that it will actually provide economic and social opportunities for the people that live here.
Got it. We're kind of running out of time, but I want to ask you one very, very important last question, which I ask from all of our guests. If we take a time travel to the future, 70 years into the future, into 2092, and things have gone the way that you would like them to go, so that the future is hopeful and positive. Maybe this future has the Hawaiian values have been present for 70 years, and people have kind of taken them in. So, how do you see the future in 2092? From if we would teleport there right now, how are the people treating each other? How are the communities? How are the cities? How is the world looking outside the window, in your view?
Well, the question you just asked is so relevant to Native Hawaiian thinking, because when we as Native Hawaiian people make a decision on something in the present, it is with the intention that this decision affects 7 generations into the future. And so 7 generations, you do the math, we're well into the end of the, first century of 2020s, right? And I think when we think about it that way, the decision that you make right now is so much more important than you realize, if you are thinking from the perspective of future, right? And for Native Hawaiians, including myself, I think we would love to see fluency in the Native Hawaiian language by all citizens of the state of Hawaii, all residents. I would love to see Hawaii become a place that is not so expensive to live, that we have a great balance, so that the Hawaiians that are living outside of Hawaii have a chance to come home and to live in the place that they were meant to be, with the culture that they were born into and meant to have. And that future generations of Native Hawaiians are actively involved in whatever economy we would choose for the future. And that at some point we would have some kind of resolution for, making right the wrongs that society has done to Indigenous people like us in our place. It is sometimes very hard to be Hawaiian, because with that comes the fact that you are American, but also the fact that we know that we've had a interesting history with America that hasn't always been very friendly or kind to us. And there's also some historical things that haven't really been addressed when it comes to Native Hawaiian sovereignty. And so for me, I would like to see that those things resolved, and in a place where we can all be at peace with it and move forward together with aloha.
Okay, thank you. Can you quickly teach me the thank you, Hawaiian version of thank you?
Mahalo.
Mahalo.
Mahalo. M-A.
Mahalo. M-A, right? Mahalo.
L-O. Mahalo. Hawaiian is very phonetic. So if you know other languages like Tagalog or German or Spanish, you pronounce every letter, and you're using the sounds of the vowels that are more of the soft sounds of the vowels. A, E, I, O, U. Mahalo.
Got it. Okay. Mahalo, Malia. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
It was my pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for the questions. I really appreciate your time. Aloha.